Are we telling everyone? That's the message I get across the bottom. We are telling everyone that I am going live. We are back. We are live again today. And this is another episode of Property by Kazi. It's me right there in the merch, back in the official hoodie, as I was pretty much cussed out for not wearing it last week and not being consistent with the branding. So we're back for another episode of Ask Somebody Else. Ask someone else. My bad. Admin told me I keep doing that as well. So what is this? This is an opportunity for you fine people to ask an industry expert questions in the property space. Now, this is the one I've been waiting for. I've been saying it for a while. It is the expert conveyancer join us today. A number of years of experience, so you could potentially ask questions. Hello.
Hey.
How are we doing? You're good?
All good. I thought I'd be on time, you know.
Hey, punctual. I love that. See what I mean? You know the solicitors, because they charge you by the minute. They make sure they're on time. How you doing? You good?
All good. How you doing?
I'm good. I like the headset as well. You're looking very professional. Beard's looking trimmed nicely, Looking very fly, sir. So I'll just reintroduce. We've had a couple more people join the live. So this is another episode of Ask Someone Else. It's an opportunity to ask an industry expert. We do it every week, every Sunday, 6 o'clock. So if you haven't got your notifications on, make sure you got them on so you don't forget. This week is the lawyer episode. As I've mentioned, it's the one I've been looking forward to because, quite frankly, you charge us the most money. So we're going to get some of your time for free today. So
absolutely.
I hope everyone's ready and everyone has some really good questions. So I'll do a little introduction to you. Feel free to say what you don't want to talk about. It's fine. But obviously, I know you as a specialist in your field, so as conveyancing. You've dealt with just general purchases to bridging loans and different things within the property space. You've helped myself and a lot of people. I have a lot of experience within the space, qualified quite a while ago now. So you are on Instagram, the prop lawyer.
I am indeed the property lawyer. It's a channel I started back this time last year when I was put on furlough because I had a bit of spare time on my hands. Made a couple of YouTube videos and then started to join up on Instagram, but I haven't really done anything social media wise because I really haven't had the time, to be honest with you. But hopefully this will push me forward to moving on.
Yeah, hopefully this will drive you forward. So guys, obviously if you've got your questions, and I hope you've got a few, because I know I have, so I'm going to start with my questions anyway to warm everybody in. And then, so I think obviously from a starting point, I guess not everybody knows why they need a solicitor or what the role is a solicitor when purchasing a property. So with obviously from the sort of ground up basics, could you start with that?
Yeah, so in England and Wales, whenever you buy a property, you have to have a conveyancer. A conveyancer comes in many formats. It could be a solicitor, it could be a conveyancing solicitor, a conveyancing executive, for example. And there are different types of qualifications you can have for doing conveyancing. And the main difference between all of them are relating to who we're regulated by. So a solicitor is obviously a professional regulated by the SRA, which is the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Most law firms are regulated by the SRA. And
I've noticed all you professionals love an acronym.
Indeed. But there are other conveyancers out there in the market who aren't regulated by the SRA. There might be the CLC, which is the legal executives out there. There could be just general conveyancing executives. The truth is, you don't have to be qualified to actually do my job, but it's helpful to be qualified because when it comes to acting for lenders and stuff, they like to have a professional acting on their behalf as well as your behalf. And our job is basically to make sure that when you come to buy a property or even sell a property, our job is to make sure that we do everything from a legal perspective in the way that it should be so that there aren't any issues in the future.
Okay, it's nice, very in-depth, succinct answer there. Which I guess leads me on to another question, because as you mentioned, there's a number of different ways you could choose your
the person to represent you when buying or selling a property. And also a question I get asked regularly is how, with anybody, when you're trying to build a dream team, because effectively that's what your conveyancing or a solicitor is, they're really adding value to your whole team that you've built. How does one go about choosing a good solicitor?
Well, the majority of times, whenever you put an offer in through an agency, for example, you'll always be recommended to solicitors that are they're well known in the area. They're normally working with the agents as well in the past. Usually, those agents get a bit of a kickback because that's how we market with our business model. But if you use a solicitor that's recommended to you, whether it's by the agents, whether it's by a previous client or a friend or mortgage broker and so on, that's the best way to really find yourself a decent solicitor, because really you can always get a good solicitor. You could really get a really bad solicitor. It's one of those things in life which it's something you can't really help with. So you got to try and choose someone that you like, get on well with, and build on that relationship in the future.
And I think from everybody that we've spoken to, whether it's architects, whether it's solicitors, builders, one of the main things has been that people have said personal recommendations really go a long way, along with also somebody that you can have a relationship with and actually get along with. Because I find a lot of the time, particularly when I'm maybe in a more complicated purchase, I'm speaking to my solicitor so regularly that if we didn't gel, it could end up just being very detrimental to the purchase and the deal as a whole. So I think that's very accurate. And for me, just to add to that, I know obviously it's been different with lockdown, but generally speaking, I like a solicitor that I can see and I can sit down with. So the larger, big organizations that kind of do really high volume, but you don't really have that one-to-one touch, from a personal experience, that I haven't found them that favorable. And then I guess the other question in regards to in regards to solicitors is cost, because there's quite a big cost disparity between, what could somebody expect to pay a solicitor for representing them in a sale?
Solicitors vary depending on prices, experience, where they're based as well. I would usually say a decent solicitor would cost, the cost you need to allocate for your budgeting purposes is around the $2,000 to $2,500 mark for someone that's a generic high street law firm who actually knows what they're doing. Sometimes you can go for the cheaper people, and there are people out there that are cheaper that are good, but most of the time, especially in the London area where you and I are based, Kaz, paying for the cheapest person will always get you the cheapest service. And what you're trying to want to get in a transaction is service rather than, rather than saving on the pennies. You want to get the deal done quickly so that you don't get gazumped in the future, for example.
Exactly. So many things, or even just stuff that could be overlooked. Like, what if they are not going through certain details with a fine-tooth comb and something gets missed out that then, in the best case scenario in the future, you've got to pay for a big indemnity policy, or you've got to pay for something else going forward.
And, there are law firms in central London who basically charge like $4,000 plus for legal fees, and they're going to deal with your high net worth clientele. I think what you need to do is find someone that's recommended to you, whether it's by the agents, whether it's by someone else, whether it's by a friend who's always used a conveyancing solicitor in the past, who's never had any issues, kind of thing, and stick by that recommendation.
Okay. And I think an interesting conversation that Teke has asked, I can't pronounce names. I'm so bad with pronouncing stuff when I try and read it on the screen. Has asked basically, does it matter if the solicitor is in the location of the property, or could a solicitor work, in different properties based in different areas in the country?
Thank you for your question, Takeo. I think, generally speaking, it doesn't
See how
really
smooth
matter.
you pronounce the name. It just made me look rubbish.
It doesn't generally matter where the solicitor is based, but it's always helpful to have someone that knows the area. So I used to work in South East London quite a lot in the past, and I know how to get around certain issues with the Dulwich estate, for example, or with other other landlords that I know how they work, because obviously when you're buying a property which is ex-council, for example, I'll know that Lambeth have a certain way of doing things compared to Wandsworth, compared to Southwark, and so on. But I may not know as much, dealing with a local authority up north, for example. It is helpful to have someone that's local, but it's not a necessity when it comes to buying a property, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think I probably agree. I think it's a lot of like stuff in property is like that sometimes local expertise, although somebody who's not familiar with the location could find it out, it may be a case that it takes them that little bit longer. There's slightly delays. Maybe, they're making a bigger deal out of something that actually, from experience, because it's your local area, that that's not a big deal. You've dealt with 5-10 cases where it's not a big deal. We know there's an issue with this road being unassigned, however they have decided they're going to adopt it, and I just know this. Whereas somebody who's not familiar with the area may have to jump through a lot of hoops.
And an example to give there is, like, for example, Lewisham Council, the way they do their leasehold properties is you as a leasehold have to insure the building of your flat, but the communal areas are insured by Lewisham Council. And, a lot of solicitors that don't deal with Lewisham won't ever realise that that's how they work, and they'll ask for indemnity policies that just aren't necessary in that sense.
No, makes perfect sense. So I think there's so many stuff that we could touch on. Obviously, we've started with how to find a good solicitor. I think one thing a lot of people are just not actually familiar with is potentially just the difference between how, from a solicitor's perspective, the difference between freehold and leasehold properties. So I don't know if you'd like to just touch on that quickly.
Yeah, so a leasehold property is effectively a leasehold title, and it derives from a lease agreement between a freeholder and a leaseholder. So where you've got a leasehold property, you're effectively buying an agreement between the landlord and the tenant to say that the tenant can use a certain space of the property or the building for a set period of time. So most leasehold properties have a long lease, usually 90 years or 100 years or even 999 years. But ultimately, you always have a landlord, the freeholder, who is granting you the right to use that space in return for a ground rent that's payable. And the ground rent could be monetary. It could be a peppercorn ground rent, which basically means it's zero. And ultimately, when you have a freehold property, you own the land that the property sits on. But when you own a leasehold property, you actually own the right to occupy a certain space within the building, which is usually a flat. And so most flats in England and Wales are a leasehold property. And when you own a flat, you're not technically owning the actual physical space of the flat. What you're actually doing is you're owning the agreement to use the space of the flat for a certain period of time in return for the covenants such as paying ground rent, paying service charges, sticking to the rules and regulations of the landlord, basically.
So I think then, obviously, as to lead on from there, in terms of people that are maybe first-time buyers or even, buying your second property, but it does mean that there are additional things that you need to sort of look into when buying a property, particularly if it's an investment property as well. Like, what are your ground rents like? What are your service charges like? Are there any major works that have been planned? And all sorts of things to do with the property that you would need to look at to make sure that the investment makes sense for you. Ade, your question, which was buying a property, there are a lot of things you have to pay for. Do you think some of these middlemen can be cut out? Do you mind elaborating on that? I didn't fully understand that question. Let's have a look. Another one from Els. How do we ensure our solicitor can complete an auction purchase on time? And is this something you specialize in?
Well, auctions are very different. I mean, you and I have done many auction properties in the past, Kaz, and over the years.
We haven't you haven't missed completion for me yet?
Never will for any client. Auction properties are, I don't know if you've watched Homes and a Hammer, but that's a really good example to start off with. When you buy a property in auction, you always exchange contracts as soon as the hammer goes down. So what that basically means is you have agreed to buy the property as soon as the hammer goes down, and you pay your 10% deposit, usually a 10% deposit, which is effectively the deposit for your seller to hold on to until you complete. Now, it depends really on your financial circumstances as to whether or not you can complete in time. And so it's always important to have the legal pack checked before you go into an auction to put a bid in, because you might find that actually there's some provisions in the contract that you're bidding on that may be detrimental to your transaction that you're trying to do as a whole. So, for example, there may be additional fees that you may have to pay. You may have to pay a 2% surcharge on the actual purchase price to pay as a premium to the seller. You may have to there may not be enough time between exchange and completion to get the deal done. And if you're buying with finance, ideally you want to get your mortgage and principal in place. But I'm sure Kaz has mentioned in his previous interviews on a Sunday with finance companies, you can get bridging finance and there's other ways of financing your purchase. But as long as you get your financing in place, there'll always be a way to there'll always be a way to complete. And, it can come to the wire, but we'll always try our best to get it done. Because at the end of the day, we don't want you to lose your 10% deposit at the end of the day with an auction property.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned, it's just a case of you've got a short space of time. There's a lot of moving parts between the legals, your finance, getting those to marry up, potentially even a separate representative from your finance team that also need to sign everything off. And I think really, although you can have a great team in place, there is still an element of earnest on you as an individual, because it's your money at stake, to make sure you are sort of oiling those cogs and making sure that the process is still ticking along and things are going at the pace you expect.
Absolutely. And when it comes to auction purchases, I think the key question you've got to ask your solicitor is, how busy are you? Because if your solicitor is really busy and they don't have the time to actually focus on an auction purchase, then you might want to find a better solicitor, a solicitor that's more free with their time, because timing is everything, and the last thing you want to do is breach the contract that you've entered into when you go into an auction. But it's always a good idea to have a chat with a solicitor before you put your bids in, just to see what their capacity is like, so that they know that there is a potential additional bit of work they're going to have to deal with in the next coming month or so.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on something as well, which is obviously at auction, you have legal packs that are presented as part of the package that you can download and review beforehand. Now, you mentioned obviously another thing you can do to make sure there is fluidity in that transaction is having that legal pack reviewed ahead of actually going ahead with bidding. So 2 questions off the back of that is that a service that you provide? And sort of generally speaking within the industry, how much would something like that cost?
Yeah. So when you before I answer that question, Kaz, I'm going to explain to you the process of buying a property from a legal perspective, just as you would do with going to an agency, for example. So when you put your offer in with an agent and your offer is accepted, what happens is the solicitors talk to each other, get the inquiries out, get your searches in place and so on, and you get to a position where you're ready to exchange contracts. Once you've exchanged contracts, you put your 10% deposit down at the same time, and you've then agreed a completion date to complete the actual purchase of a transaction. In an auction transaction, a lot of that legwork happens before the actual auction takes place, which is where you have to get the auction pack checked out. A decent sales pack will include a lot of the information you would normally get when you buy a property, which is searches, legal title documents, title deeds that are historic, for example, that need to be looked into, pre-contract inquiries that have already been responded to, and so on. And when you get an auction pack to review as a solicitor, our job is to basically advise you on the auction pack itself, to say these are the issues that you may want to be aware of, these are the issues that may come up with in the future, and ultimately we want to make sure that you can A, enjoy living in the property or doing what you want to do in the property, and B, more importantly, we want to make sure you can sell the property in the future or remortgage in the future. We generally charge a fee. In an auction pack, we charge a fee which is fixed up to the point of exchange, which is the pre-auction pack. We normally charge around 500 quid for a freehold property, 750 for a leasehold property. But what you get with that is a full report giving you the actual advice that you would do from a normal solicitor had you bought the property outside of an auction. If you're successful in the auction, we will then charge you a supplemental fee to deal with the what we call the post-exchange formalities. Again, that could range between 500 quid and 750, depending on timescales, as well as how much work is involved between the exchange and completion as well.
Yeah, because I've found as a developer or an investor, sometimes it could be quite difficult because there may be 3 auctions in a month that I'm interested in, 4 lots in each auction. So it's 12, so that could quickly spiral. So I would say start to read legal packs. Not to say that you're going to be able to understand everything, but you'll start to understand the pattern with the legal packs, what you should expect, particularly with freehold packs as well. They're a lot more straightforward. And in terms of, like you said, there's a lot of standardized things that we expect to be in those legal packs. So for me, when they're not there, that's a massive red flag. Like if somebody's excluded the searches in a pack where everybody else has them, it's like, well, what's going on here? What's being hidden? If there's an issue on the title, what can I not see, etc. So I would say, again, just to save yourself money, start to read legal packs so you could potentially quickly maybe weed out properties that would have an issue. And if there's something you are really sort of do want to go for, then I think like you touched on earlier, like £500 is by no means like a small amount of money. However, if that £500 is going to potentially save you £5,000, 10,000 plus, potentially even loads more. I've seen people that have literally lost hundreds of thousands of pounds because they didn't understand what they were buying. Like they bought a property that had maybe an enforcement notice that the building actually had to be knocked down because it was illegal. So technically they bought land and not a building. So it is really important to understand what you're buying. And obviously that's why we aim to build our dream teams and our experts and our go-to guys. I can be like, look, do you know what do you think of this one? And obviously that's why it's about building relationships with experts in the industry.
Absolutely. And most of the time, whenever you find a property you want to buy an auction, you don't normally have a lot of time to get all the information that you want in hand. So let's say you found a property which has got a bit of a light pack, there's no searches included or anything like that, then it might be worth actually saying, do you know what, let's get the searches ordered in advance, because when you come to buy the property, you don't want there to be any headaches later on. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, all headaches can be resolved even after exchange of contracts, which is when you've agreed to buy an auction pack. There are legal indemnity policies you can take out, which will cover certain risks. But
can you just explain what an indemnity policy is? Because a lot of people are not familiar.
An indemnity policy is effectively a insurance policy, which is a one-off cost to either a seller or a buyer, and it covers the risk of certain issues happening in the future. So you can take there are many types of indemnity policies out there. You could have a lack of building regulations or lack of planning permission if you find that there's been some changes to windows, for example, that haven't been taken out with building regulations. You can find that there's a defective lease with a plan which isn't quite in colour or whatever. You can take out indemnity insurance for that, for enforcement, to protect yourself from any enforcement issues. And there is a wide varying range of indemnity policies one can take out for the benefit of you as a buyer, and more importantly, the lender who you're going to be borrowing your money from, because 99.9% of the time, if there's an issue, your lender won't proceed without the indemnity policy in place anyway.
No, that does makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing you said that I think really hit home, and I hope hits home for a lot of people, is that almost any issue can be resolved. Now, obviously, I say that with the caveat that you need somebody who wants to resolve the issue on the other side to work with you, who's obviously proactively trying to sell that property. But somebody who's put that property in auction, generally that is the case. So you can resolve things, and you can. I mean, a lot of us here are not just owner occupiers, but are also investors. So if we're buying a property with a view to make money, sometimes we've just got a cost in, a cost, whether that's an indemnity policy, whether that's some sort of appeasement you have to make to the other side, but you can get the deal across the line. I'm just going to do a little reset just for everyone to explain what we're here for today. So
sure.
My name's Kaz or Kazi from Property by Kazi. This is our Sunday at 6 p.m. session, the catch up called Ask Someone Else. Today we have the property lawyer guy, he's on sharing some knowledge with us. He's not charging us his normal £500 an hour, and he's here for free today. So make sure you guys enjoy. If you are enjoying, then give us both a follow if you're not already, and get those questions across of anything, property related within, legal questions. Yeah. So I'm just thinking, it was one thing as well that you mentioned, obviously, and I think not to cover everything, but what you mentioned, obviously, that you charge $750 for a leasehold and $500 for a freehold. We've spoken about a few of the issues that can come up, or things that you like to look for when doing a pre-auction pack. What are the kind of the go-to things? Because the honest thing is, there is quite a lot of rubbish in auctions sometimes. There's some great deals, but there's a lot of stuff that people are struggling to sell, have issues for whatever reason, that they think, well, I can't, no one's buying it on the open market, let me fling it in auction. What, as sort of laymen, should we be looking out for when looking at auction packs, particularly for leasehold properties?
So I think the key things when looking for an auction pack is you want to see the contract to see what additional fees may apply in addition to the bid you're putting in. So, for example, you may be putting your bid in, but you might have to pay a certain percentage on top to cover the seller's legal fees. It's
almost become standard now, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. You may have to pay the seller's agency fees, for example, as well. And as well as like disbursements and other costs that are associated with the sale of the property, which ultimately what you're doing is you're paying for the seller to not have to incur any costs with regards to the auction sale at all. The other things you want to look at really is to see whether or not the seller has the right to sell the property. And what you will normally be given is a title register, also called an official copy of register from the land registry. Now, if I just take a step back and explain what the land registry is, when you buy a property, 99% of the properties are always registered at this government database registrar called the land registry. And so every property, whether it's a leasehold or a freehold property, usually has a title number, which is only used for that specific property. And it allows you to have the knowledge that that's the proof of who owns the property at the time of when you want to purchase. Now, you may find that the seller is not the person named on the title register, and there could be a reason for that, which is pretty simple. It could be, for example, a power of attorney selling the property. It could be a probate sale where you've got a probate granted to a third party to sell the property on their behalf. It could even be a bank or building society who's repossessed the property, who's trying to sell the property as well. And so the last thing you want to do is agree a auction purchase where the seller doesn't have the legal right to sell the property. And 99% of the time, the auctioneers would have done their due diligence already to make sure that
I would say that percentage is lower,
Do you think so?
Because I've had because I think a lot of people, maybe not historically, but recently, a lot of people are doing what I think is classed as like creative purchase solutions and creative options, where they've maybe exchanged but not completed on the purchase. And I've seen quite a few of these come up in auction. Some of my year before last deals, that this was an issue that we realized actually they didn't have the legal right to sell the property. And because it had been misrepresented by both the auction house and obviously the seller, we actually managed to get a massive reduction in the purchase price.
Yeah. And it works depending on how you negotiate it, to be honest with you. But there are sellers out there who will buy a property on a Monday and put it in an auction on a Friday, even though the land registry hasn't updated their records and so on. So, the key thing is checking if there is a legal title by the seller to own the property, to sell it to you, basically. And then the other things to look into when it comes to an auction is, especially with leasehold properties, you want to make sure the lease term is lengthy. You're not going to have any issues in trying to get funding in the future. Most of the time, lenders will lend on a property which is more than 80 years in terms of a lease term. You do get your specialist lenders out there, your bridging finance companies and so on, who will lend you money based on a lower term of a lease plan. But your general high street banks won't lend you money until provided that sorry, let me rephrase. Your most banks will not lend you money if the lease term is less than 80 years because they'll want you to extend the lease. And you've got to be careful because you don't have a legal right to extend your lease straight away. You have to normally own the property for at least 2 years before you can extend the lease under what's called statutory rights. But that obviously doesn't apply if you're going to go to your landlord voluntarily to say, can we get the lease extended? And then they can charge you an arm and a leg for extending the lease in the future.
And I think there can be a provision they can extend, like, so if you've already served a notice on the landlord, you can, or to extend your lease, you can sell the property with the benefit of that notice to the new buyer.
Yes, but you have to make sure the right provisions are in place within the agreements and the transfer deeds and so on, so that if the seller serves what's called a Section 42 notice to your landlord to extend the lease by an additional 90 years, that benefit of the extension notice will be passed on to the buyer. But you have to make sure you comply with the relevant rules and regulations in doing so. So you can't, for example, exchange on a Monday, serve the Section 42 notice on the Monday as well, and then buy the property on a Tuesday because there's not enough time for the notice to be accepted by the landlord. Okay. So whatever assignment benefits you have will be void, for example. So, I mean, this is where it's quite important to have a solicitor involved, or even a conveyancing solicitor who knows what they're doing. And again, it pays to have a decent lawyer to look after your interests whenever it comes to buying a property.
I mean, yeah, if somebody's representing you, and we're talking about, in property, always considerable sums, you need to make sure that you have the right person to look over what you're doing, which I think leads quite well onto a question from Joanna. So Joanna was asked, would you recommend getting a loan agreement looked over by a solicitor when receiving funds from an investor? And the second part of the question would this usually be included in the fee, or is in the conveyancing fee, or would this be an additional cost?
Hi, Joanna. Usually solicitors don't advise on lending conditions between you and your borrower. You and your lender. It's a commercial aspect.
I think, just sorry as a caveat, so I think a lot of people, in the property space now, people are potentially working with investors that are providing the capital sum as a deposit, potentially to, that's going to be forwarded to the. So I guess it's like a private agreement.
Yeah.
To raise the funding away from maybe the main lender.
So most conveyancing solicitors who do conveyancing on a day in, day out job don't usually advise on the finance terms of your of your finances, basically. So if you're borrowing money from a third party, which isn't your usual banks, then or even a normal lender, then they can advise you on the terms of the agreement if they've got the expertise to do so, but they don't usually include those fees within the standard conveyancing fees. It's normally additional fees because most solicitors charge by the hour on average, but with conveyancing, nothing's ever charged by the hour. It's always charged on a fixed fee basis. So you may be given a quote for the actual conveyancing of a purchase, and then you may be given a separate quote for the advice of the legal agreement you want to enter into with your benefactor.
And I would say definitely initially, if it's the first one you're doing, I'd make sure that, any agreement you draw up, whether it's an agreement with, particularly when we're talking about significant sums of money, whether that's the agreement with your builder, whether that's the agreement with somebody you're borrowing money from, or if you're trying to do some sort of slightly more creative, whether it's an option agreement on a property, any agreement that could have significant financial impact on you in the long term, I would definitely recommend getting a specialist to look over it. So it may not be your conveyancer, it may be somebody else in the space, but it would be somebody who deals with that type of commercial contract or financial agreement, and they'd sort of probably quote you, like you mentioned, away from the main cost independently for that.
Yeah, and the word you use there is specialist. If you've got a solicitor that specialises in that area of law, then they'll be able to advise you. Or then 99% of the time, they'll pass you on to another colleague of theirs who can advise you on those circumstances.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely it. So CJ Developments has asked, are there any loopholes, or I'm going to use the word provisions, in regarding stamp duty for second properties?
The answer is generally no. There aren't any loopholes apart from if you're effectively buying the property under someone else's name, where they don't have another property to own. You can do trust deeds, but generally speaking, it becomes a lot more expensive, and it can be a bit more messy in terms of trying to make sure you don't pay the higher stamp duty.
Yeah.
The rules of stamp duty at the moment is if you own a property which is less than £40,000 in value, then you don't have to pay the higher stamp duty. So you could always, for example, enter into a declaration of trust with your a co-owner of a current property, and you can basically say that they own the majority share of the property. So that if you want to then buy a property in the future, you can always declare that you've only owned a £40,000 stake in another property, which results in saving that stamp duty. But there are other implications involved here with regards to stamp duty that you've got to pay when it comes to transfer vacancy and that kind of stuff. So it can be a bit of a mess in that sense. So generally the answer is no, I'm afraid.
My only positive experience on the other side was just, I guess maybe this again is more of a developer answer and probably wouldn't help those owner occupiers, but there are some provisions at the moment to nullify stamp duty if you're buying a derelict property for less than £500,000, I think is the threshold at the moment. But
yeah,
again,
I think so.
With current stamp duty rates, depending on the price of the property, you also have to put together a report and a pack to explain that the property is derelict and why it's derelict, and you know, represent that correctly to make sure you don't end up being, you know, not only paying your stamp duty but also paying penalties that you have to work out what's going to cost you more. Is it the stamp duty itself, or is it preparing that package? But that would be my only sort of 2 pence on that one.
I mean, my advice to that is your solicitor isn't usually a tax advisor, so you're better off getting specialist tax advice, and provided your tax advisor tells you the position of the tax and provides it in writing, your solicitor shouldn't really have an issue, because at the end of the day, we act on your behalf when it comes to filing the stamp duty return. And if you've been given independent tax advice to say that you don't have to pay the higher stamp duty because of certain provisions, then of course your solicitor would 99% of the time listen to that advice and go forward on that basis.
Nice. I think we have a couple quite detailed questions. Again, if there's stuff that's in too much depth, this one's big. I need to actually read it. So what provisions are there in terms of a transfer from one name to another? The owner is abroad and they want to transfer the property into their own name effectively. Like how, I guess I think I know a little bit about this. This is a friend of ours. How are you doing, Horace? Hope you're good. So I guess their question is in regards, they currently own the property is owned by a family member overseas who has no intention to come back to the UK and wants to transfer it to family in the UK. It's unencumbered. What's sort of the process of doing that?
Well, if the family member owns the property as 100% fully ownership, as in not owned by anyone else, and you want, or that family member wants to transfer.
Oops. Have we lost Dwij? I can't actually, I'm not sure if it's just me that's frozen or if it's everybody. I can't see. Someone write in the comments if you can still hear me, or we can still hear Dwij. I don't know if it's just me. Am I here by myself? Anyone want to tell me? Yes, no, maybe. I think we've lost him. I don't know. It might be a battery issue. He's gone. It's me again. Well, you can't see either. Can you see me? Am I here? Can you hear me? Well, I'm here still anyway. Hopefully he logs back in. Unfortunately, we're in a position where I cannot answer that question because this question here is for an expert. Okay, Dwij, you're there. Let me try and re-invite you again. Bear with me a second. Give me a second. And I'm going to get him back on. Okay, I've just sent you a request. Let's see if we can get you back in. In the meantime, just a little reset once again. So I am Kaz or Kazi from Property by Kazi. He's back.
Hello, hi.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what happened there.
Sorry,
We
ladies and
lost you.
gents.
What
Yeah,
happened? Technical issues?
I'm in a little area called Red Hill in South London, which doesn't have the best reception. So I
No
apologise.
worries. It's been
Yeah.
fine thus far. So I don't know where. So if you just start from the beginning of the question, so just to refresh, it was somebody wanting have sole ownership of a property. They want to transfer it to a family member in the UK as they've left the UK permanently, have no intention to come back. They have no outstanding finance. What would be the process for that?
So, party A, who is abroad in this situation, wants to pass the property to party B, who is in the UK. In the terms of HMRC, that is still treated as a sale and purchase, even though there's no money being transferred over between A and B. Ultimately, you're still effectively selling the property from A to B, and therefore B would still be liable for stamp duty for the transfer, and A could still be potentially liable for capital gains tax for disposing the capital. Yeah, if there's a gain made on that property. Now, there is an argument to say that if there's no money transferring hands, then there's no stamp duty payable. However, most of the time, HMRC will want to have proof as to why the transfer is taking place. So you are opening yourself up there to a can of worms when it comes to transferring a property in that way. The best thing to do there is to speak to a tax advisor and a actual solicitor who can advise you on a personal level on the transaction as a whole.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. So obviously, Iris, I think that's your answer. You have to speak to a solicitor, also a tax advisor, get that dream team on. Got a couple of people you can go through the last Sundays, and I'm sure you can pick up some great experts in different areas to help you with your question. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at this one from Leanne Dooley. That was great pronunciation for myself, if I do say so myself. If a bank is listed on the charges register of a property being sold at auction, does that mean there's an outstanding mortgage on the property? So that's, yeah.
The answer there, Leanne, is 99.9% yes. However, what you want to look at in the auction pack is a document called Replies to Requisitions on Title. And within that replies, there will be a section to say that the seller is undertaking to clear that mortgage on completion. Now, most solicitors usually provide this before completion rather than before exchange of contracts. So even if you do buy the property, check the terms of the agreement to make sure that the sale isn't subject to that charge, because the last thing you want to do is take over someone else's mortgage.
Exactly that. So I think, yeah, that's just, again, where having a good solicitor on board that can obviously make sure they do their due diligence to make sure you're not left financially exposed at all, and goes back to the point of why have a good solicitor on board and who to use.
Indeed.
Let me go through. Let's have a look. So that's not really probably your area of expertise. This was from Jermaine Ajayko, good friend of the show. I've always wanted to say that. Where did you work before furlough?
So I can't really tell you where I work purely because of insurance purposes and so on, but I used to work as a partner in a multi-branch based law firm in South London. So I started there as a paralegal, worked my way up as a qualified solicitor, even became partner at the law firm. And then during COVID, that law firm got taken over by another law firm. And I don't know what's happened to that law firm at the moment, but I am currently a consultant. Again, I can't tell you where exactly I work for, but I'm sure if you follow the channel, there'll be times when you can come find me, or even ask Kaz, and I'm sure he can introduce you
definitely.
to.
I mean, for everyone, obviously sharing a lot of really good information today. So do make sure you head over to the Instagram, give him a follow. And obviously, if you do need that legal advice, you can reach out to him directly. And then obviously, as a client, it's a lot different. You know, we can speak a lot more frankly. But Jermaine, thank you for coming. Love to see you in the building as always. I think I have a couple of questions for you, just based off my personal experiences.
Sure.
And one of them is sort of linked to, partly linked to the pandemic. But a lot of people at the moment are trying to beat stamp duty, and not just because of that, but how long would you expect the conveyancing process to take for freehold / leasehold properties, and how long is it taken in the current circumstances?
Very good question, actually. So the national average for a freehold property is 8 to 12 weeks, and the national average for a leasehold property is 12 to 16 weeks to try and get an exchange of contracts done from the day you put your offer in. This does vary depending on certain situations. For example, you may be buying in a chain, and someone in the chain may still need to look for a property to buy, for example. You might be getting searches as part of the conveyancing process, and different local authorities work on different timescales. I generally say that a freehold property shouldn't take any more than 4 to 6 weeks to exchange contracts, and a leasehold property shouldn't take any more than 6 to 8 weeks to exchange contracts. And that's using a decent solicitor there. I've had leasehold properties that I've exchanged within the space of 3 working days of having the offer accepted, because they were cash buyers and because everything just aligned up quite well. I've had leasehold properties that have taken more than a year to exchange because there's been issues down the line, or we've had to get a deed of variation done and that kind of stuff as well. So there isn't really a fixed time period when it comes to each transaction. However, as a general guidance, 6 to 8 weeks for leasehold is always a good way to go. It's always important when instructing solicitors to see what their capacity is like at the moment. So if you came to me, Kaz, and said, Dwij, I've been your long-term client for God knows how many years now, I need to buy a property which needs to complete by June, most solicitors, including myself, would say to you, I'm really sorry, Kaz, it's unlikely we can get it done by June, but we will try our best.
However, you're going to tell me, because it's me, you're going to do it, right?
As it's you, Kaz, we will always try our best, but there's no guarantees. Don't come and sue me if I don't get it done, basically, is the key.
No problem.
There are many factors that cause a delay in a transaction. These can be relating to mortgage valuations being booked in. It could become searches for the local authority. It could be the sellers who are taking their time because they're nervous, or they don't quite know what they're doing, or they're trying to buy a property to buy, and so on. And all of these factors do come into play when it comes to looking at timescales. So it's always important not to stick at exchange deadlines. It's very easy when you put an offer in to say, right, I'm going to exchange in 28 days, but it's very hard to stick to those timescales when you've got so many outside factors which can delay such an issue there. Obviously, not much of an issue if you're a cash buyer and you're willing to take a view on 100 things. Kind of thing.
Obviously, if you got to tick all the boxes. So I think before I let you go and head off and enjoy the rest of your Sunday, I think one final question that I think, it's not necessarily that relevant, but I think it comes up so much. Japanese knotweed, massive issue or not a big deal?
One of my favorite things in the world. Japanese knotweed is not a big issue to me, provided there is a treatment plan in place. And the key thing is you have to make sure you're buying the property for the right price if it is suffering from Japanese knotweed. A Japanese knotweed is effectively an ornamental plant from the Victorian times, which came into the country. And you'll see a lot of it in the country. And it's one of those plants which is invasive. And what that basically means is it can actually go through the concrete foundations of the building, which is quite dangerous. And so it can drop the value of your property substantially when it comes to buying a property or even selling a property. But if it is being treated and it is being monitored, most lenders won't have an issue with it, provided they are aware of it from the beginning. So the answer to your question, Kaz, is not the big deal, but make sure you're not overpaying what the actual true value of the property is.
Okay, fair.
Which I'm sure I've told you in the past as well. From
memory. Yeah. And I'm sure I told you I'm buying it anyway most of the time because I've always negotiated a great price, and it's just built in. I found it most frustrating is when the neighbor has it and you can't deal with the stuff in the neighbor's garden because it's not yours. But that's a conversation for another day.
I mean, the key thing is when it comes to solicitors, what you've got to bear in mind is our job as your conveyancing solicitor is to make sure you can enjoy living in the property from a legal perspective, and you won't have any issues when it comes to selling the property in the future. The condition of the property isn't our job to advise you on. That's what your surveyor does. And your surveyor will then go to the property itself and tell you what the issues are. It's for you to then raise the issues with your surveyor, ultimately when it comes to the actual conveyancing process.
That's good. So finally, plug yourself. Where can they find you? If people want to reach out to you, if they want to instruct you, how can they get in touch? I know you've got the Instagram, and the Instagram is what again?
So the Instagram is The Prop Lawyer. And I have a YouTube channel called The Property Lawyer. Not very active, to be fair, but that's because I've been very busy due to the stamp duty holiday at the moment. But I am planning to put out some more videos. I tried to do a professional video on certain categories, but at the moment there's only a couple of videos on the YouTube channel. Ultimately, drop me a message, send me a DM through the Instagram page, because I have set that up now. There's no post on the DM because I don't have time to actually put posts up, but I will do one day. I've got this big vision after looking at Property by Kazi and thinking I could do what he does. But, you know.
Right, but the main thing is that it's there, because in reality, do you want your solicitor to be posted on Instagram, or do you want your solicitor to be dealing with your inquiries and making sure they get your auction purchase completed within those 28 days? Much appreciated for coming on and taking time out of your Sunday.
You're very welcome.
Again, this is Property by Kazi. Ask someone else, opportunity to ask an industry expert. So thank you, Dwij, for being that expert today. Next week, we have Karina Lepore, the winner of The Apprentice 2020, I believe. So last year's Apprentice. Yeah, so she smashed it out, did amazing. I think she had the most wins on any series of The Apprentice. We're just going to be talking a lot about her journey in business, also touching on the property space. But I think it is very important to understand that, you know, there are a lot of steps before investing in property. And a lot of times those are building your brand or building your own personal, you know, portfolio within whatever it is that you're doing, and building an area of expertise to allow you to have disposable income to invest. That will be the final episode of season 1 of Ask Someone Else. So that will be 12 episodes we've wrapped up. I do want to say in the comment section, or just, you know, below when I post this to either Instagram or YouTube, let me know what you think. Should we go for a full-blown podcast? Do you like the interactiveness of the Q&A? What your preference is? Just, let me know. But I appreciate you guys for being here. That's me. I'm out. It's Property by Kazi. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Dwij, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. See you.